Idaho National Laboratory. We will be presenting today on the energy proof of concept, energy SBOM proof of concept. This is for the June meeting, and this week we'll be talking about updates on where we stand over the past couple of years, like the journey that we've been on with SBOM. Where are we at? We're going to recap some of the proof of concept efforts to date. We'll also be talking about other venues for SBOM engagement. There's lots of opportunities to collaborate. We know that SBOM is an active area of research, so there's lots of work going on in this space. So we'll talk about other venues that many of you may already be involved with, and so we'll share a few of them, and perhaps you have others that you may wish to share with us. Would encourage, if you have comments or questions, please post them in chat. We will catch up with any comments and questions in chat and encourage you to do that. For this particular session, we have enabled microphones and cameras, and later in this meeting, we will be requesting for comments and feedback. And so we'll talk about that as we advance through the agenda. One of the questions we're going to be asking is, how do you use BOMs in your environments? So we're really trying to assess maturity today. So in the past, we had some insights as to how folks were planning to use BOMs in their environment. Now it's more of, how are you using them in your environments? Are you using them for procurement? Are you using them for vulnerability assessment? How are you actually using them in your environment? So that would be ideal if we could better understand how you all are utilizing them in your environments. And we're specifically targeting, if we have anybody who's in the asset owner operator community, we'd love to hear from you. If we had to prioritize, we'd love to hear from you first, because that's an organization that we'd love to hear more about and learn. Are you at a point in maturity where you're really evaluating them? Is this something you're operationalizing as part of your everyday operations? And then lastly, we're going to dive into a few priorities that were discussed previously. Like, you all helped us to identify several areas that maybe we want to dive into deeper. So our objective today will be to provide a status update on those areas and also look towards the future. Where do we want to go next? Again, we're at this certain point in maturity. Are we ready to advance to the next level of maturity and assess kind of where we're at now versus where we've been in the past? So again, just for awareness, our sponsor on this is DOE CSER, and it's obviously all around, we title it SBOM, but as we all know, there's different types of bombs. And so one example program that CSER sponsors, actually a couple of them, are Energy CyberSense, which Energy CyberSense is really around securing the critical supply chain, the energy supply chain. And underneath that umbrella lives Citrix. Citrix will be the test execution arm. So those are example programs that CSER sponsors. The website for the SBOM site is listed here. So if you hop out there, the site hasn't changed. This is the same address we've been using. If you go out there, you'll find, of course, lots of information and history, which I'll talk about in upcoming slides. But I do want to highlight Citrix. If you're not familiar with Citrix, Citrix is really cyber testing for resilient industrial control systems. And Citrix, as part of the output, we generate a BOM. We generate a hardware bill of material and a software bill of materials. The requirements that we have for Citrix are slightly different and unique for our particular program purpose. And so when we talk about SBOM formats, which we'll be talking about in a couple slides here, Citrix has its own unique SBOM schema that we leverage. And so in the future, we're trying to consider, do we want to be able to ingest BOMs of other types into Citrix? The answer is likely yes, as we continue to build our partnerships with vendors. And some of you are represented on this call. So again, thank you for being a Citrix partner. In the future, we anticipate we will want the ability in the Citrix program to ingest various types of BOM formats into the Citrix repository to aid us as we continue to evaluate critical infrastructure. So again, just for general awareness, again, thanks to CSER for sponsoring this. We've shared in the past, a couple of meetings ago, we had the opportunity to share some collaborative research that was done by both DOE CSER and DHS CISA. There's a paper that we delivered. Really, it was around software bill of materials sharing life cycle report, or the SBOM sharing life cycle report. We shared that, so I'm not here to rehash what we've done, but I want to highlight that this is a good resource to consider as you evaluate kind of standardizing. As we continue to work to standardizing the naming convention, like how we communicate about bombs. There's some good information in there, so I'll highlight this. Again, this slide deck will be made available, and of course, this will also be available on YouTube later. Let me shout out to Jeremiah. Also, we've got Jess Smith, and perhaps, I'm not sure if Tyler Williams are on, but there are several that contributed. So I want to highlight that this was collaborative effort, not just between two government agencies here, but also a collaborative lab effort. So we had engagement from Pacific Northwest as well as INL to deliver this report. Jeremiah or Jess, is there anything you'd like to highlight on that report before we continue?
I don't have anything technical, just if folks are reading through this and have feedback or comments, this is very much still an active area of research. This is what we've gone through. This was kind of the way I look at this was a little bit of an advancement on the original NTIA work. However, it's not the be all end all. So, how do we go forward with this? Where do people want to grow this? Where do we need to continue performing these research areas? If you see things we messed up on, please let us know. This is definitely in progress, and we'd love to make another version of this here in another year or two that takes it to the next level.
You, Jess. Appreciate that. Jeremiah, anything else to add?
I think the only thing I would like to add is that these are active areas that multiple agencies are working on. For example, the CISA community, along with other stakeholders, meet every week to discuss this in the sharing working group. So I invite you, if you're interested in SBOM sharing, to join us at the CISA working group on sharing SBOMs.
Thank you, Jeremiah. All right, great transition. So now we're going to discuss a few different venues for bomb engagement, SBOM, and other types of bombs. And again, we'll invite any additional comments that you might have. Feel free to drop them in chat if there are other groups or organizations that you're working with. Would love the opportunity to hear from you. So thank you. All right, so other venues for SBOM engagement, of course, as we just heard Jeremiah discuss, the CISA working group, I'll describe them as really the leader in this particular space. They've got several different working groups, which will be described in the next slide. But most recently, I think last week, they had the SBOM Rama. Again, they're continuing to lead the charge here. There's several different work streams, and invite you to participate. As you just heard Jeremiah, feel free to join those groups. On the Department of Defense front, I'm not aware of any sort of public facing. Again, would invite in chat if you have any awareness to any public facing engagement opportunities. But we do know that the DoD is also actively pursuing bomb research. And we've had several conversations with them, for example, even on some of the other programs that CSER sponsors. So DoD is definitely interested in this arena as well. On the standards development, I discussed this briefly, that Citrix has a unique schema that we've developed specifically for our use case. But I do want to highlight that there are other standards that are being pursued, and I know there's others now in addition to these. But Cyclone DX is one, certainly. There are links that will be included in these slides afterwards, but as well as SPDX, and I believe SWID, is that another one? Jeremiah, remind me here.
SWID is technically, but not a lot has been done as of recently with SWID.
Okay, thank you. So Jeremiah, would it be correct to say that these are kind of the two leaders, or are there others that we should discuss here as far as standards?
I think that's a good place to start, and if others would like to bring additional ones into the conversation, they're more than welcome to.
Sounds great. Thank you. So for awareness, we all know I like to describe this. Many of you have heard me share this before, but it reminds me back when we had, okay, I'll date myself a little bit here and then we'll go a little more modern, but when we had like Betamax and VHS tapes, okay, maybe you don't remember that, but when we had DVD and Blu-ray, right, competing technologies, and initially both of them required their own different physical device to even play the media. Whereas now it's like, okay, you can put a DVD or a Blu-ray on the same disc on the same disc player and it will play it. So ideally, we want to get to the point where we're reducing the number of competing, mechanisms here or schemas, if you will. But in the long run, I think it will work its way out. Again, from Caesar's perspective, having a standard is important, and certainly on the Citrix program, the way that we're utilizing them, at least initially, has some unique use cases. And our objective and what we're working towards is being able to ingest multiple formats. And so that's how we're working to manage through this as we're transitioning and figuring out, who's going to win this format war. All right. I do want to highlight that there's a lot of global support for SBOM research. These are just examples, and I'm sure you all have many more. But the EU has the Cyber Resilience Act. Again, there's a link here for convenience, as well as UK seeking to expand existing regulation. There's lots of details in there around SBOM and requirements. Japan, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry also has lots of details around SBOM requirements. So we don't envision that this train is slowing and anytime soon. It's continuing to advance forward as the research continues. There's also some research going on in Germany, and Jess Smith has, certainly a named contact there, but there's agencies in Germany involved in doing research on SBOM. So again, feel free to use chat if you're aware of any other sort of major global research going on in SBOM. Feel free to drop that in chat. We're all learning together, so appreciate any insights you may have to share. Okay, now going into the CISA SBOM work streams. This is a little more details. I do see that Jeremiah has dropped some information in chat there where you can reach out to request joining any of these meetings. Jeremiah, again, is there anything you'd like to highlight about these 5 different work streams, working groups?
The only highlight I would like to make is that there are a lot of fantastic people that are donating of their time and attention to supporting these work streams. And I think if you have not had an opportunity to attend any of these meetings, it would be a great time to start based on we just finished a wonderful SBOM-arama event in Los Angeles this last week. And I believe there's a lot of momentum. So now is a great time to join if you haven't so far.
Thanks, Jeremiah. Is there any output anticipated from the SBOM-arama, or can you, sorry to put you on the spot, is there anything else you'd like to highlight about that event last week?
The SBOM-arama was a great time for the different work streams that you're viewing to be able to help the community understand where they're at. We had different people from different sectors contribute, including the automotive sector, the healthcare sector, the financial sector. We also looked at what Japan is doing. Just as an example, I'll post the agenda so you can see what was done in its entirety. I will say that CISA is planning on providing all of the slides and access for people to view not only the event last Wednesday, but there was an SBOM 101 event that was done the previous Friday. And so if you have colleagues or friends that are new to SBOM, once those links go live, I would highly recommend that you push them towards a really good overview of SBOM for those beginning the journey.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremiah. Appreciate the recap and look forward to learning more about that as it becomes available. So thank you. All right, transitioning into the next set of slides. This is just to highlight that, again, our objective is to continue building this body of knowledge and sharing information as we do on the SBOM website that's available for each of you. For reference, again, this starts at the kickoff. When we kicked off these conversations, these are links going back to some of the conversations that we've had. Everything from what is an SBOM, as Jeremiah was kind of just describing an SBOM 101, where we had our initial kickoff. This dates back to when NTIA and Alan Friedman was at NTIA, and then transitioning into more recent, where we had some cooking classes in 21 and kind of describing a lot of the how-to discussion was happening there. And then in 22, we just want to highlight that the SBOM website that we use here, the sbom.inl.gov, that website's now been updated thanks to some input from key stakeholders. We've now made that filterable because there's a lot of different videos out there, a lot of information. So we tried to tag those based on topic areas so you can more easily filter if you're interested in learning about a particular topic. So that's a feature that we've enabled. And then ultimately, these are examples of collaboration that we continued forward with, including supporting the SBOM conference. We had conversations around vulnerability, exploitability, exchange, continued all hazards analysis discussion. There was a briefing on SBOM and nuclear, which is interesting because many people think of nuclear as, maybe digital averse or certainly managing risk appropriately in that environment. There's a paper that was written on this that you can search for as well on SBOM and nuclear. So nuclear is also doing research in this space and how they can further advance security in the critical infrastructure, nuclear power, critical infrastructure. We also, last year in 22, shared a draft report of the SBOM sharing lifecycle, which the final paper was delivered earlier this year. There's also a great video out there on building an SBOM from binaries, which Robert Urbis contributed to. He helped deliver that. So Robert from INL, I don't know if Robert's on the call. Just quickly advancing through. I don't see him, but Robert, if you're on, any comments you'd like to add to that? Okay, he must have had conflict, and that. So we've also delved into SBOM transports at a very high level, not detailed. That may be an area that we further want to mature in. Also continued advancing the venues for SBOM discussion. And for a complete list of all the videos, again, link here. And thank you to each of you for your contributions. It's active research, not just for us, but all of you. There are many of you who are industry partners. We appreciate all of your support, as well as tool vendors. The tool space, I would say, is advancing. At least my observation is it seems like the tools are continuing to advance and become more useful. And so we'll just have to continue to see where those tools end up as we continue to mature. All right, finally, wanted to open the floor for, specifically, we'll start with any owner operators that are out there. If we have any participants from utilities, we'd love to hear from you on how you're using BOMs in your environment today. There's a few questions here. Would invite you to either share verbally, feel free. We've got mics enabled on this conversation, which is unique. So we'd like to invite, if there are any owner operators, utility partners out there who are using BOMs in your environment today, can you answer any of these questions? So we'll now open the floor to you.
This is Mick Bronze at the Southern Company. Jeff, I'm not even sure who forwarded your invite to me, but I'm grateful to have it and glad to be here. So thank you. We have been using open source SBOMs for some time from commercial providers of software. We require that when we purchase a new offering. And that both the quality of those SBOMs and if we find anything notable upon initial review prior to purchasing, and then also the reaction of the supplier when we engage them about anything that we discover, all tell us useful things about those potential suppliers. As far as going forward, we have two active, they're kind of bigger than POCs, but efforts right now for evaluating use of the SBOM, primarily focused on vulnerability management. One is in our power delivery space. We're close partners with a tool provider that was prominently featured at S4 this year. We are working with them to dig deep into a specific, selected substation and evaluate essentially all of the equipment that's in there, and then use kind of that practical data and information in collaboration with the vendors to see, okay, what will we do next with this? How could we operationalize that? Again, primarily focused on vulnerability management, but there are opportunities as well for, kind of life cycle maintenance potentially in planning that could grow out of that. And then we also are doing a focused effort, more IT centric, with another partner that I think is represented on this call, that owns a platform that's kind of in all types of cyber risk in the supply chain platform, but they are also building a SBOM reverse engineering engine and able to ingest both the formats that you described. And we're looking at that more on the IT side. Again, focused on vulnerability management, but just kind of a parallel effort with that OT centric view. That I think summarizes where we are.
Awesome. Thanks, Mick. Welcome. We appreciate you joining. I know when a contingent from Southern Company was out at INL a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to meet with several folks and did invite a few different participants. So we're glad to have you here, Mick. Again, thank you. Thanks for sharing how you're using them and kind of a little bit about your vision. What I'm hearing is it's really focused on procurement as well as assessing potential vulnerabilities and managing risk in your environment. Is that a good recap, Mick?
That is a fair recap, both on the IT and OT side. That's the focus.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it. Again, we'll open the mics for any other vendor, owner operators, asset owners, anybody. I see someone with hands up. Go ahead, over to you. I see a couple folks. So TJ.
Sure, yeah. TJ Lozier, Duke Energy. Mick, I think David and I were the ones that forwarded it to you. We're in a similar state. We're in a similar state as SoCo. Similar use cases. One other area that we're investigating is to your comment on procurement. We have requirements when we put new equipment into production that we do a penetration test of it, and we are working with our processes and our subject matter experts on how do we leverage SBOM to do a more robust and potentially shorten the engagement span or the time of engagement for a penetration test, but get better results using an SBOM.
Great. TJ, thank you. I'd love to dig a little deeper, and certainly don't have to go into areas where you're uncomfortable, but without naming specific tools, my assumption is you're using some type of an automated testing tool to perform those pen tests, and you're utilizing that to validate if there are any known vulnerabilities, at least to that particular tool. Is that how you're performing that activity?
Oftentimes, we are contracting out the penetration test. So we're using a select few vendors that are that specialize in that, and we haven't yet married the presentation of an SBOM with that vendor, but we've asked them about how well it would be received and what type of value there would be in providing that along with the equipment that we're asking to get tested. And the feedback we got was very positive. So we haven't gotten to a situation where we've executed on that, but that is our intention for going forward.
Great. Thank you. That's great insight. Thanks, TJ, again from Duke. We appreciate hearing from you. Any other comments, TJ, before we transition? It looks like we've got another, it looks like we've got Raman next, but TJ, anything else to add?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Raman, over to you for comments.
Yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. This is Shrikant with Enbridge, right? And so the topic around SBOMs is huge. It's actually something that I've been trying to push for a long time. And we do have, the support from the CIO and in that space too. The challenge, and we do vuln assessments, pen tests, right? We get third parties in, we do it internally ourselves, and so on. Obviously, from an application standpoint, the challenge, with DLLs that are vulnerable and so on, the challenge is with the plethora of SBOM vendors out there, using it as a buzzword and just selling their stuff. I'm a little bit confused on what or which vendors would be ideal for the energy sector, more specifically from an OT perspective, right? And see if we can actually leverage those. So I'm looking for help in terms of is there a preferred vendor list that we know are good in this space for getting that out? Because ultimately, I think it's all about sharing the list that we have going around, and making sure the sector as a whole is more secure. So looking for that, and also the other part, Jeffrey, was that I don't know if they're. I know the government is actually keen on making sure vendors are compliant with providing SBOMs, and while the other individual did mention that they were requiring their vendors to provide SBOMs for their stuff. I don't know if there was an actual requirement from the sector as a whole, and if we should make that as a requirement. Thanks.
All good points, Shrikant, and I apologize for misstating your name.
Oh, no.
So thank you, Shrikant. Appreciate that, and all good questions. So these are comments that we're looking to glean from you all to help us move forward. I heard several comments there, and I'm hoping our partners here are capturing those as action items for us to follow up on. Certainly, Shrikant, we agree that it is a confusing landscape. Tool vendors are continuing to mature, and I would suggest, just from my observation, and I could be very wrong, but what I've observed is tool vendors are maturing at a faster rate than industry's ability to consume, make this operational, et cetera. Like, how do I use this in my environment? So you're right in that there's lots of different vendors. It's confusing. And, there's some sensitivity here. Obviously, being a government agency, I know that, and I don't want to speak on behalf of Caesar and Stephanie Johnson. If you're here, I'd welcome your comments here. But my observation and suggestion is there's some risk in government, adhering or recommending these particular vendors, because, that's kind of a balance between government and, private entities. So I will say that this is a challenge that we're looking to address as a lab, as the labs, plural, considering how we might be able to aid in that. Are there some tests that we might be able to execute to determine feasibility, viability of given tool vendor? And maybe it's somewhat genericized. At this point, we're still trying to figure out how we might be able to do that. But it is definitely a topic that's come up recently, and we're eager to delve into that space, understanding their sensitivities around that, because we certainly, I'm sure Caesar wouldn't want to advocate, vendor A versus vendor B. There's some risk there. Jess, is there anything else you'd like to add to that? Or I'd welcome other input from other labs if you have comments on that. So Jess, over to you first.
No, sorry, I've been distracted. We've got an interesting conversation about regulations going in the chat. So, no, that's just some interesting. When you get into the nitty gritty of, okay, well, how are we using this? Why are we using this? What are the available resources? Somebody just pointed me at EEI's contracting documents, which I don't know how I missed that one. Thank you very much, Cassie, for highlighting that. I just went and pulled that up off the internet. the different ways that people are using SBOM it's an interesting discussion point.
Thanks, Jess. Again, I don't see Stephanie, our program sponsor, on. I think she may have had a conflict. But Stephanie, do you have anything else to add if I've missed you? Okay. Not hearing her. Let's go ahead and continue. Are there any other asset owner or utilities that have comments here that you would like to share?
I can share some. This is Jeremy McCowan from GE Gas Power, and
Thanks,
I'll
Jeremy.
be speaking to the product perspective as a vendor. And hearing some of the things I've already heard, I think there's some useful information I can share about our processes. The first is we've been operating an SBOM task force on a weekly cadence for over a year now. This is explicitly in the product space, so you can think of our flagship products as the primary things that we discuss. We make controllers and HMIs and the control system and obviously turbines. And so one of the interesting aspects of this for us is we've been going between different non-traditional uses for SBOM use cases, including hardware bill of materials as well as system bill of materials. And we happen to produce a system report already in our existing HMI infrastructure. And it tells you about what's on your HMI, what's installed at the operating system level and below. And because we've already had this tool for some time, one of their first efforts was to integrate SBOM export into this tool. And so that's something that we're trying to make a more normal use case within our own practices. And I think that might be helpful on an instance by instance basis for human machine interfaces. When it comes to the reference product SBOMs, things that we would like to describe and be more transparent with the composition of what's inside of our products that you receive in the form of installers or a machine that's dropped off or is inside of a PEC. Those are being driven by customer demand. We've received several customers requesting more SBOMs now. That's good for us because that helps us to define what our requirements are. But those requirements have been exceptionally vague. And when I say exceptionally vague, think 2 sentences at the highest level. And so demand for this is helpful in the form of requirements if you work with us or other vendors. And I'll also say that we've been working by bringing customers into our task force as well as suppliers into our task force for presentations and interactions as a community. And because of that, we have requested successfully and received 3 SBOMs from suppliers, 2 in standard formats, 1 in a PDF format. And all of that gives me a lot of hope that the supply and demand aspect of this is really how you drive it. And I just want to encourage anybody on the call to request SBOMs, and that helps us to deliver.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate you being on the call and a Citrix sponsor. I know there's several vendor partners on here with us now. So again, thank you, Jeremy, for comments. I'll open up to any other Citrix partners that may wish to share.
Hi, it's Cassie Crossley from Schneider Electric. Yeah, I wanted to share just in general, we're along the same path as who was it? Just spoke, Jeremy. We've got a lot of Jeremys on the call, I guess, today. We also are providing SBOMs to our customers. We do require an NDA because we do consider it confidential information. And then we have deployed a SBOM sharing tool that we give them access to. The interesting point, which I'm sure many can identify, is that you definitely need the SBOM from the version that you're running and not necessarily the latest version if you're not patched. So we provide that version, which takes a lot longer to get. We're not seeing the same success out of generation tools, because many of our products use commercial and most of the generation tools focus on open source. And it's very important to include the commercial libraries in that frame of reference, so you're aware. For example, one of my products I know has 9 different commercial libraries. So a lot of our SBOMs are partially generated with a lot of manual shenanigans put on to fill in the gaps. So we're finding, quite a bit of work still in the, the tools that we consider really good because of that commercial aspect and being able to validate the data so that we know we're giving correct information. So we've got thousands of SBOMs generated from tools, but I don't consider those shareable until the dev teams have validated the quality of those generated SBOMs. So for those that are operators and you're using tools to assess the SBOMs, there's a lot of false positives. For example, it might find a snippet of a library, but not the full library, and that's because the software publisher is maintaining that portion of the code rather than inserting the full dependency. And we can backport patches, so you can't necessarily take it verbatim, whatever is generating it, unless the dev team has evaluated it and provided comments, and if possible, provided VEX information.
Great comments. Thanks, Cassie. Very much appreciate, and kudos to you. I know you've really leaned in this space and been a leader. So thank you very much, Cassie. I appreciate your support.
Thank you.
All right. Are there other comments from any other Citrix vendor partners out there? Again, I know there's others on here.
I'll just add on to Cassie's point there about the VEX. An SBOM in and of itself has a relatively limited value without a VEX. And so that's part of, to your number 4 below, the challenges is, you can get an SBOM, but then what do you do with it? And does it give you valuable information without coordination with the producer to validate the exploitability or otherwise? So the SBOM and VEX really need to go hand in hand if you want something of higher value from the process.
Thank you, TJ. I appreciate that. And again, a couple of weeks ago, we had the opportunity to meet with some folks from another major utility. And the feedback we heard was, and I'll attempt to recap, was at a high level, the VEX is where it's at, right? We need that. I think the next layer of maturity that I heard and asked for was, okay, now can we prioritize? If we've got now, the VEX says we've got N number of potential vulnerabilities. Now, is there a way to prioritize that and then also figure out ways to mitigate? So prioritize and mitigate was the comments that I heard, were the comments that I heard from that. So all good comments. Thanks, TJ and others. Anything else to add? Again, one last call, and then we'll transition to the next set of slides.
Hey, Jeff, I'm here.
Hey, Steve.
So again, being a Citrix partner, we're still finding our way through the entire SBOM process from Hitachi Energy perspective. But definitely, we see the value. Presently, we're developing the SBOMs inside for internal purposes for baselining. But agree with what both GE and Cassie said from Schneider on this. We need to see this start showing up in specifications that will drive the industry towards this. But as we've gone down this journey for the past year, we still really need to have this collaboration with the utilities to understand the use cases on how these SBOMs will be used and how they will be maintained and managed. So I think that's some of the big challenges. I also agree with what TJ said, that it's so important to work with your OEM on this. Just don't send a device out to a third party and have the extraction performed, because there could be a software component in there that's not exploitable. And so it will create unnecessary concerns or worries and a lot of extra effort So again, the collaboration and partnership is an important step in this. And definitely SBOM, we're in, as Jeff, you say, the crawl phase of this process. And definitely it's something that the industry needs to get behind.
Awesome. Again, thanks, Steve. Appreciate everybody's support here. So I think we're hearing a similar story from each of you. So again, thank you. Over for any additional comments again, and then we'll transition over to Jess to the next set of slides. Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and continue on as we move towards next steps. Jess, over to you.
Sounds good. And if somebody can enable sharing of my screen, we're going to do some live editing. People get to watch me fumble through typing on the screen if we can. If not, Jeff, I might ask you for being my scribe. But the goal here is we've talked a lot about what we've done. We've made some great progress in software bill of materials, whether that's creating standards, whether that's creating some of the initial. Okay, well, what is an SBOM? Let's get a white paper out. Let's talk about, well, how do we start talking about creating SBOMs from open source versus closed source, that type of thing. We've got a lot of interesting resources out there. But what's next? What's our next goal? Because you've got national labs and we have a bit of funding from DOE to help push this forward. We've got a lot of interested parties on the call right now. So my goal for the next, we'll call it about 10 minutes before everybody gets to run away to their next meeting, is what is that next? What should we focus on next? And what are our top priorities? And I do see I have sharing. Thank you very much. Let's grab that screen. All right, there we go. So what are we focusing on next? What are our top priorities? Let's start with where we're at. And that's these first two slides that I've got here. Way back when we worked through a list of, okay, well, what should we be doing? There was 130 items on that list originally. But we pulled out, okay, well, what are the highest priorities? And these were the initial high priorities. And you can see some of them, we've hit them pretty good. Okay, well, let's put together some general white papers. Well, we've got several there. Let's talk about SBOM confidentiality. We've got our partners over in healthcare have put together some good material there. Similarly, we've got, okay, well, how do we maintain an SBOM? We've got, again, a lot of videos on these, a lot of Word documents on the VEX piece that we're making a good stab at it here. So in general, this was what I took out of that. And I'm going to walk you through my process as we go through. Let's see if I can make sure I get Teams to show me the chat so I can see if you guys have comments. So this was the original list. And we've got checkboxes in here for things that we have at least one product out that would support that. My first question is, does anybody disagree? Is there anyone that says, you know what? No, we cannot tick off develop SBOM taxonomy or minimum attributes of SBOM. Are there any on this that you're like, hang on a second, this doesn't make sense? And I am monitoring chat, so if you feel more comfortable typing, that's an option too. So I'm a pause. And if you generally agree, if you would, in the reactions, would you give me a thumbs up, please? Just to make sure I haven't put you to sleep yet. Jeremy, your question, can you elaborate on what you mean by provide? Where can you give me a little more?
Sorry, yeah, just something that you said in regards to providing for the check boxes. How do you imagine this list being used? I think is what I'm after.
Okay. My goal for this list is just to say, okay, well, this was our original list of priorities. Let's start identifying the things we've already done, at least basically, so that we can start focusing on, okay, this is next. The next slide on this is, okay, well, and I was trying to get Teams to let me do this, so it didn't work. We're working with PowerPoint to go through these ones that we haven't done and say, okay, well, what's our new priority level for these things? And if there is one of these that we're like, yeah, we haven't done this yet, maybe this does need to be first priority because we're not as done as we think we are. Does that help answer what your question was?
Yes, yes, and I apologize. This is the first iteration of this meeting I've joined, so I'm kind of catching up.
Nope, you're good. This was a little bit of a attempting to cadge Teams and PowerPoint into doing an activity, an interactive activity, and that always is a challenge. So it's a little bit clunky. Okay, I've got a
It is the the requirements / requesting of SBOMs, like how to write good language for this, included in any of these?
would you, is that part of contract clauses? Would you put it in there? Is that, does
Yeah,
that
and
include it?
The contract clauses are very high level in all of the cyber contracts I've seen. So every company probably has a different process, Steve, Jeremy, ourselves. And I have a document that, and a precise process because we all distribute them differently right now. So I think it just, in the standard contract clauses, it says upon request, provide an SBOM, but it doesn't talk about mechanisms because there's no common in the industry yet.
yeah, that's where I was after, but I'm also referring to like the courtesies around it. Part of the NTI and document was about being, neighborly and helpful and engaging in that way. So I think the surrounding good behaviors or good recommendations of how to engage in a way that doesn't that follows the spirit of asking for things and us not all locking things behind every NDA possible, or every, delivering the absolute minimum. I'd like the spirit of the original document to be carried through that as well.
Okay, does that kind of modify enough that we can, does that get the gist of where you were going?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it could even be simpler than that. Just good engagement practices or something like that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. I think that's a good, we focus on the legal, but unless there's something there to back up the legal. I love the fact that the federal government decided they were going to have their SBOM executive order. My concern has always been, okay, we're going to deliver the federal government all these SBOMs, and they're going to get printed out. They're going to be a PDF. It's going to get printed out. It's going to get set on a shelf. That's not useful. So making sure we've got those procedures, tools, all of the extra behind the material topics, I think that's a very good point. Okay.
I do have one more if there's no one else.
Oh, go for it.
I've been made aware that there's some requirements for selling into the federal government, establishing contracts with the federal government, and I'm not certain that we are required to do so with any of our engagements today. Some knowledge or some understanding about who those requirements apply to, and for what reasons, maybe definitions of what's critical infrastructure and what recipients of that critical infrastructure would classify us to have to conform to those requirements. I think the document was M2022-18.
So that was going to, I think you're working ahead of me here, which is awesome because my next question to everybody was going to be, what are we missing? And that does sound like a thing that would be very useful would be a regulatory landscape survey type of what's out there and what applies to whom in a very short version, because there are so many regulations out there. We could have thousands of pages, but something that was, say, 10 pages or less that gave you, okay, well, what matters to different fields? Is that kind of where you're thinking?
Yes.
And I think we discussed that just yesterday. Jeremiah, remind me, on the adoption group, or did we get, or it was recently discussed. Now I can't remember if it was in person last week or yesterday.
I think I might have mentioned it yesterday, actually.
Okay.
Charlie.
Okay, Charlie. Yeah. So it was like, oh yeah,
yeah.
it was a good point. Right. I don't think we got somebody working on it yet. I know that internally for Schneider, I can provide my list, ITI, everybody that we're working with has lists of where this applies or where it's headed, but not in every segment like the FDA and all of that. I haven't seen a comprehensive list, so.
Right, neither have I. And I guess as a follow-on to that, I think this being a DOE specific meeting, it would be great to hear a very clear roadmap from DOE about what they're going to
Right.
expect.
Yes.
That, I mean, we don't want this meeting to be responsible for every agency, but
Right.
certainly I think DOE is within its purview. So thanks, Cassie.
And Tom Ulrich mentioned, yeah, the updated memo from last week on M2316 specifically made some adjustments. And from all the in-person meetings, well, not technically in person, but all the meetings that we've had, is that and I think it was said by Alan last week, I can't remember, Jeremiah or somebody can remind me, that the SBOM is specifically not going, they're going to remove the mention of it in the next version of the software attestation form, but they couldn't confirm that because they haven't finished the comment period. So
I think they already did remove it. And from my interpretation of that, it's basically SBOM is cited as an example of a thing, but it's not specifically required for the attestation.
Yeah.
It's like auxiliary information that you can provide, or that the agency could ask for.
So just I want to, Tom, if they decide to push out the final release of the software attestation form on July 1st, the first set of SBOMs is due in 3 months for critical infrastructure. So it's not a year or more. They could decide to say, hey, these are the comments we're taking and rule an official software attestation form.
Well, Cassie, they've already decided to push it out. That's what that memo was about.
Right.
It's basically pushed back a year.
They,
Sorry. So my reading of it is that CIS is going to take some time to collate those comments and then come out with something they submit to OMB.
Right.
And then OMB is going to take some time to review that, probably less than CISA took. And then once OMB gives it the rubber stamp, then the clock starts. So my estimate on that is probably, just pure seat of the pants, probably 3 months for the deliberations, and then the clock will start sometime, October-ish.
No, it's really going to be more like a year, because there are actually 4 groups that have to work on this.
They're going to rubber stamp.
The CISA people alone, they have to develop they have to revise the attestation form. Then the CISA staff members, and then it has to go, of course, to CISA's legal. I'm sure it's never going to get out of CISA without legal, and that's going to take a couple more months. So I'd say that's 4 or 5 months there, and then it goes to OMB, which is up to 3 months. It says in the in the memo, and then it finally goes to who is it? Someone else, and that's another 3 months. So I mean, I don't think it's going to be much less than a year that it's pushed back, if it's any less than a year.
That could be very well true, but I think in terms of our looking at this thing, we are not ready to bet that it's going to take a year. We want to be ready sooner.
Well, yeah, folks? No, you want to, but I mean, that's the point.
Let Jeff finish his meeting.
Pardon?
Time out. Time out. Apologies, folks. It sounds like we've got a lot of energy around both the standard contract clauses, procedures, tools, engagement practices, as well as this regulatory landscape overview with some DOE guidance thrown in there. Since we have all of about 2 minutes left, what I am proposing is I'm going to throw both of those into the chat window. If for just a rough voting, if you would give thumbs up, if you use the little button to comment on the chat posts, thumbs up ones that you think are higher priority. If contracts has more thumbs up, we'll focus there first and then hit regulations secondarily. Again, since we are short on time, I was going to be looking for volunteers who would be willing to jump in and help provide guidance, not necessarily get in and do the digging, but make sure we're headed down the right path. So if you are interested in providing some kind of guidance or help with all of those, please stick your name in the chat, feel free to shoot Jeff or I an email, and we will loop you in as we start working through those. Jeff, with the last minute, over to you.
Thanks, Jess, and thank you all. I'm happy to see the engagement on all of this and lots of excitement. So my suggestion is that we continue this portion of this conversation in our next meeting. So we didn't have enough time to fully explore. We certainly have identified what appear to be at least two areas that have a lot of interest with regulations and landscapes and DOE guidance taking the highest priority as of now. So again, we'll look forward to reconvening. We are meeting on the third Wednesday again. So we'll look forward to reconvening. And this looks like it will continue to be a topic for our next conversation going forward. Anything else before we close this out? All right, hearing none, again, thank you all for joining. Thank you for your support, partnership, and collaboration on this challenge. And have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk soon. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jeff and everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.